So want to thank the Oregon State University Extension Service for putting this on, as well as Spark Northwest for joining us today to kind of talk about solar energy for farmers and rural landowners. So going to jump right in, save folks some time tonight. Just a little bit about True South Solar. So True South Solar is a local solar company here in Southern Oregon. It was founded in 2010, and we serve Jackson and Josephine County here in Southern Oregon. We do residential and commercial installations, so for folks' homes as well as businesses throughout the valley. We have about 30 employees currently. Today, I'm going to talk briefly just about how solar works, what makes a good site for solar, a little bit about industry trends, some of the costs. Every solar installation is different, and so I'm going to talk about some of those nuances. And then I'm going to pass it on to Allyse from Spark Northwest to talk about some of the incentives that are currently out there. So how solar works. So basically, solar is pretty easy and complex at the same time. So there's lots of different moving parts. The main component is going to be our solar panels. And those solar panels, sunlight hits them and we make direct current. So we make electricity from sunlight. That direct current, just close that down, sorry about that. That direct current is sent to your inverter, and the inverter takes that DC energy and turns it to AC energy so we can use it for the home. There's two types of mounting systems that we use, one on the rooftop as well as one on the ground as well. So for easiest installation, it takes about a day, 2 days maybe. We install it right there on the roof. The ground mounts take a little bit longer, can take up to a week. We have to do concrete pourings, make sure that's all set, and then we can do the racking and the installation. There's also trenching involved. So depending on how far away it is from the house, is going to take us some time as well. We then take that solar array and we attach it to the electrical panel. That is something we're going to need up to code. We can't install an electrical panel that's not up to code. And then that electricity, if we have excess, gets sent back to the meter and then goes back to your electricity, the utility grid. So we have the utility grid is basically, we have a net metering policy. So when you're producing excess energy, that energy goes straight to the grid. There's also monitoring included in these systems as well. Before, if you have a DC inverter, you will just have something you go to look at. Most systems nowadays have AC microinverters. And so we can actually have monitoring right there on an app or on the phone for you as well. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot more storage as well. So storage is some type of battery setup that you would have. There's lots of different types of battery setups folks use. We've been using the Tesla Powerwall just because of the brand recognition and the reliability of those systems. So pretty basic solar panels to inverters, how we rack it, how we put it down on the ground, how we tie it into your current existing electrical, and then that gets sent back to the utility meter, goes back to the grid. You can monitor it and store it if necessary. Storage is becoming more prevalent nowadays, but in the past it was very, we wouldn't see storage very often. So that's the quick snapshot of how solar works, just kind of from solar panels to storage. And next, I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a good solar site. So lots of different things go into determining whether you have a good space for solar. Solar access is what we call it. So how much sunlight is actually hitting your property, whether it's out in the field or up on the roof, whether you have trees, all those things come into play when we're talking about solar and whether or not your site is good for solar or not. The other thing we really need to look at is roof quality. If we're installing on a roof, we want to see at least 10 years of useful life on that roof so that we're not removing the panels, a couple years after the installation takes place, which adds to the cost. So first step to all this is usually getting a consultation. We'll come out there and check out to see if we even have enough solar access and what that quality of the roof is. The other thing that will determine how much output you get is your roof pitch. So what angle is your roof facing? We don't like super flat roofs. We don't like super steep roofs. So most folks have 312, 412 pitch. Those are super easy, and it just all depends. Like I said, every home is different. Obstructions are another thing. So if you look at this picture, you can see a lot of vents. We usually have to dance around those, kind of play Tetris on the roof, if you will, and stay out of the way of some of those plumbing vents, gas vents. We have to stay farther back. So all those things are a consideration. So you can see the array in front of you has 4 different arrays on different angles and different pitches. And we model that out to see what that system will produce. The other thing that comes into play are going to be setbacks. So setbacks are required by usually the county or whatever jurisdiction, the authority having jurisdiction that you're in, whether it's the city of Medford, Jackson County, Josephine County. They will let us know. Usually it's for fire safety reasons, so that someone can get up there. So you can see on the home, we have a lot of space to walk around that solar array. And then on the garage, non-dwelling units, we can usually pack it, wall to wall or roof edge to roof edge. The other thing that comes into play is the direction of the roof, right? If your home faces north and you have trees to the south, not a good site for solar. So that's something to keep in mind. Not all homes are created equal. Flat ground is another thing we look for if we're looking at a ground mounted system, just to make sure that space is ready for us to install on. And then the other thing we look at is the electrical panel. So do we have enough space to intertie the solar? Is the electrical panel up to code? Sometimes when we attach solar, it brings the code requirements up a little bit higher. And so that's an important thing for us to determine during that initial site assessment. Those are some of the things that go into when we're looking at what works for a home. I wanted to talk a little bit about solar industry trends too, because it's changing a lot. I know some folks may have looked into solar in the past. So wanted to kind of share what the industry looks like over the years. So if we look back to 2010, you can see not a lot happening in the grand scheme of things for the solar industry. And this is categorized with residential in blue. We have commercial solar there in the yellow. And then community solar, you could see growing there in the green. And then utility scale solar really taking off. So 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the utility companies weren't really looking into solar as a viable option. And you can see, what it's doing now, that growth in the industry overall. So growth on all the different sectors. The other one is concentrated solar power, kind of took off and then stalled with some problems. What that is if you can imagine a whole bunch of mirrors pointing to a turbine out in the desert, that is what concentrated solar power is. So a little bit different than photovoltaic or photoelectric cells, but that's kind of what the industry looks like. Then this chart is really looking at the growth of the industry. 2016, the tax credit was supposed to go away. It was extended, so we saw a little bit of a lull, and then really taking off the last few years. These graphs here are showing us the cost of residential solar power over time. So you can see the cost 10 years ago was super expensive. Not a lot of folks did it. But as the cost has come down over time, economies of scale, we could see a more mass adoption for folks. So that's currently, what the U.S. solar industry is looking at. We see a little bit of an uptick here, and there's a lot to do with COVID and supply chain issues that we've seen. So the price has gone up a little bit, as well as financing. So now that financing has been introduced for solar for folks, that raises that cost per watt as well. So we will see a little bit of an uptick in the price per watt for solar moving forward. And then lastly, just what does solar cost? There's a lot of different variables on what solar costs. Their main thing is going to be your electricity usage. So how much energy do you actually use on your power bill is really going to determine how many solar panels you need. There's some folks that have a $100 power bill, some folks that have over $300 power bills, right? And so we're going to need more solar energy for that. The other consideration is solar resource. So how much sunlight actually hits your property, actually hits your roof. Type of equipment, if we're doing batteries, the system is going to cost more. If we're just doing a solar installation, pretty straightforward, it's going to be a lot cheaper. So number of panels as well, right? If we can only fit 10 panels on your roof, that's going to limit us to the size and scope of the cost of your system. The other thing for folks to take into consideration is their tax liability. So for folks not paying any federal income tax, it will do you no good to get a tax credit. And so keeping that in mind, that is really going to see if this pencils out or not. Like I mentioned, storage, if we add storage to that project, it's going to cost a little bit more. There are more storage incentives coming out from the Energy Trust of Oregon and the Department of Energy. So storage is seeing a little bit of an uptick over the last few years. And then again, the install type, whether it's a roof mounted system or a ground mounted system. So that's really going to determine, what the system is going to cost. So those are all the little factors that kind of go into that. That was really brief. Happy to answer questions after the presentation for folks that have specifics, but you can also feel free to reach out to us over at True South Solar for any questions.
Great, thank you.
Pretty swift.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaun. Excellent. Okay, so let me remove the spotlight, and I'm going to spotlight Allyse, our next speaker. There we go. Great. Okay, so our next speaker is Allyse Sullivan, who is a project coordinator for Spark Northwest. So Spark Northwest is a nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating the shift to clean energy, one community at a time. Their programs make affordable, locally controlled clean energy more accessible for all. Allyse joined Spark Northwest as a project coordinator after years of working in organic farming and sustainable building. Allyse works in Spark Northwest's Rural Renewables program, providing technical grant writing assistance to farmers, rural small business owners, and community-based organizations. Okay, and I see a couple of people have thrown questions in the chat, so just keep the questions coming, and then we will have Shaun and Allyse address them when Allyse is all done.
All right. Thank you, Maud, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for having me here this evening to talk about solar incentives. So, as Maud said, my name is Allyse. I work with Spark Northwest up in Seattle. Spark Northwest is a nonprofit that partners with communities across Washington and Oregon, providing assistance in getting renewable energy projects and energy efficiency projects up and running. So one of the, let's see here. One of the programs that we work in is in assisting rural communities in particular to help with their renewable energy projects. So we provide technical assistance with the grant writing, and in particular, through this project, we provide technical assistance with the REAP grant, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But I wanted to give an overview of some of the incentives that are available more broadly before getting into REAP. But down in Oregon, we partner with the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District to provide this assistance. And up in Washington, it's the Pierce Conservation District. But so we kind of span across Washington and Oregon and talk about some incentives. So these incentives, this kind of snapshot is applicable to more rural small businesses and agricultural producers. There are certainly a lot of incentives out there that just depend on your situation. Like Shaun was saying, every situation is a little bit different. So your savings are going to look differently based on your particular situation. But this snapshot in particular is kind of looking at some of the incentives that are available for agricultural producers and rural small businesses. So the first one that I have here is utility bill savings. This might be the first thing that you think of when you're thinking about going solar. It's just the money that you're going to save on your utility bill, basically. So that kind of looks like in the first year, you might save 3 to 5% of your of what your total cost of your project might look like. The next one that I have listed here is depreciation. So that's for your solar array. Your depreciation across a 5-year basis might look like up to 15%, but that depends on your tax bracket. And in the first year, that's going to look a little bit differently. It changes year to year, but with solar installations in particular, there's an accelerated depreciation that's possible. So that would be over the course of 5 years versus a longer span, is my understanding. There's also the Energy Trust of Oregon incentive for PGE and Pacific Power customers. For businesses, that is 15 cents per watt up to $15,000. For residences, that's a lower number, and every situation is a little bit different. If you're a nonprofit, or if you meet other criteria, that might look differently. So that's just something to look into. But for a small business and for an agricultural producer, it might look something like 15 cents per watt. There's also the Solar Federal Investment Tax Credit, ITC is what you might see it referred to as, and that's 30% of your total project cost. So that, I believe that is applicable for kind of across the board, but again, it might just depend on your situation. And again, like I think Shaun mentioned, if you're not paying taxes, then that's not going to be a benefit that you receive, but 30% is a large portion of your total project costs. And then the last one, the USDA REAP grant that I am going to get into a little bit more, is up to 50% of your total project costs. So that expanded quite a bit in the last year. And yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later. But looking at an example, if you have, say, a 10 kilowatt system, that might cost something like $37,500 if it's $3.75 per watt. This is kind of the breakdown of what your cost savings might look like in the first year. So again, just depending on some of these factors, the utility bill savings, that is assuming something like 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So that might be in the first year something like 4% of your total system cost. Looking at depreciation, that might be something like 2% of your total system cost, $600. The Energy Trust of Oregon incentive, 4%. The Solar Federal Investment Tax Credit, 30%, and the USDA REAP grant, 50%. So all in all, with all that added up, that's 90% off in the first year. And again, none of that is guaranteed necessarily, and it depends on your situation. But as you can see, there are a lot of incentives available to folks who are looking to invest in solar. So we're going to get into the REAP grant specifically. And again, the REAP grant is more applicable just to rural small businesses and agricultural producers. So that's something to keep in mind. But the Rural Energy for America program, which we refer to as REAP, is for renewable energy technology and energy efficiency projects. There has been a lot of funding that has become available in the last year with the Inflation Reduction Act. So it has increased from, I think, something like 50 million in total to about 1 billion, or a little over 1 billion federally. And that is for the full grant period up from, I think it began, earlier this year, and then that is secured up through September of 2024. So September of next year. So that's the total funding from the Inflation Reduction Act for REAP for that total period of time. So it's quite a bit of funding. And if you're an agricultural producer or a rural small business, then it's certainly something to look into. And we'll get into how to know if you qualify as one of those two. So an agricultural producer is defined as someone who 51% or more of their total income is coming from agricultural operations. So that could be agritourism, as well as, producing agricultural products, whether you're in animal agriculture or vegetable agriculture. There's sort of more broad scope. It used to be pretty limited, but now it's a little bit more broad of a scope of what your services can include. If you have income that is coming from another source, and that means that 51% or more of your gross income isn't just from agricultural operations, you may still qualify as a rural small business. So rural small business is defined as a community that's in a population of 500,000 or 50,000 or less, and small is what meets the small business size standards. And it's interesting because I think when we have sort of this idea in our head of what a small business is, but there's actually, it's kind of a business can be a lot bigger than you think it is. We have this picture of this Ace Hardware here. So you might qualify as a small business without really realizing it. So that's something to look into for sure. And USDA supplies this eligibility map that you can go to this link and type in your address, and you can see if you're in a qualifying area of a population that's 50,000 or less. So that's something that you can just kind of Google and look into, or we can help you with that as well. REAP grants can fund up to 50% of the total eligible project costs. So eligible costs can include equipment and installation costs, some of the engineering and permits and licenses, as well as Shaun mentioned earlier, storage. So batteries are also eligible for project costs. I have some ineligible project costs listed here, and the one that I want to touch on specifically is residential energy project costs. So if your business and your residents share a meter, that's something that we'll just kind of have to look into to make sure that your project would be eligible, because that's something that is just can pose some problems, but it's certainly not gonna make you completely ineligible for REAP. But that's just something to keep on your mind. And as you're applying for this grant or reaching out to have grant application assistance, whether or not you share a meter with your residents, if you're a rural small business or an agricultural producer, is something to think about. So the REAP deadlines have changed also. It used to be, I think, 2 deadlines in a year, and now it's quarterly. So the next deadline is coming up pretty soon here. It's September 30th. And then the following deadline is not too far after that. It's December 31st. And then you can see the deadlines after that. But this funding in particular is secured up through 2024, and REAP has been around for a while. It's just had a lot less funding. So we're not really sure what the future of it's going to look like, but in the next year is a really good time to apply for this grant because of the funding that's available. Your application can be submitted anytime before that deadline, and your application must be submitted before your project costs start to accumulate. So any project costs that happen before your application is submitted aren't eligible for this grant funding. Spark Northwest offers technical assistance for farmers and rural small businesses. So you can either reach out to me directly through my email, or you can go to our website and fill out an intake form. And we can follow up with you to see how we can help you apply for this grant. For this next period up until September 30th, we're pretty booked, but after that, we're super excited to continue helping folks apply for this grant and thereafter. So feel free to reach out to me directly through my email or through our intake form, and we can talk about your project and see if you're eligible and help you apply. So that's all I've got. I'll pass it back to you, Maud, and I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Great. Thank you so much, Allyse. That was awesome. So if it's helpful for those of you who may not have been, I guess what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll have Shaun and Allyse both as spotlighted so that they'll probably be answering most of the questions. So far, I've seen about 4 different questions. So we'll just get started. Okay, great. Another one's come in. And we've got plenty of time, so we should be able to answer these questions. And I will also throw in the chat the emails and websites for both Allyse and Shaun and True South Solar and Sparks Northwest. Okay, so the first question that we got was, do these systems work when the power goes out?
That is a great question. I could tackle that. If you just have solar and no batteries, if the grid goes out, solar goes out right along with it. Very counterintuitive. A lot of folks think I have a power plant on my roof. I should be able to access that solar in the event of a grid outage. But what the code says is basically we don't want to electrocute anyone working on the grid. So if you can imagine the grid goes down, the community has 10 solar systems and they're all backfeeding this grid, someone could get hurt. And so to code, if you do not have storage coupled with your solar, you will not have access to that solar. So that's a really good question, AJ.
Great. AJ, did that, if you want to unmute yourself, if that answered that question, seems like pretty straightforward. Okay, well, let us know if you need to follow up to that. So Michael asked, do you have a provider in Klamath County?
There are some solar installation companies out in Klamath County. It depends on if you're asking for REAP support specifically. I'm not sure that if those folks actually do commercial projects or rural small businesses or anything like that. But there is Eco Solar, who's been out there for a very long time, and I think for residential folks, Pure Light Power. But to my understanding, I don't think they do much commercial projects.
Okay, so can you just repeat those and I'll put the names in the chat? What was it?
Eco Solar.
Eco Solar, and then the second one
was Pure Light Power.
Pure Light Power. Okay, and if I have a second, I'll pull up the websites to that as well. Great. Okay, so the next question, how much cost does it add to create an island so you can use the power when the grid is down?
That is a interesting question. It depends. There's some systems that are completely off grid that you want as an island. You're not even connected to the utility company. Those tend to be more expensive. But even just backing it up with battery, it will become more expensive. But again, it's on a case-to-case basis. So Allyse did a good job of giving us a snapshot of what a business or a small farm can do. That's going to be a lot different than if this is a residence that's just looking for solar and storage as well. So it's just something to keep in mind. So no, there's folks with one of these, batteries, folks with 4 of the batteries. So it really just depends on what you're wanting to back up and how much you're wanting to back up and how much solar you have as well. So, but it can be, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 that we're looking at.
Great. Okay, good. We're getting lots of questions coming in. Okay, so next question. Can funding sources such as the REAP grant and or the solar federal tax credit be used for community solar powers? Allyse, maybe that's a question for you.
Yeah, so the REAP grant isn't, community solar projects aren't necessarily eligible for the REAP grant, but there are a lot of other solar grants and incentives available for nonprofits and community-based organizations. There are definitely ones that I'm familiar with are kind of through your utility. So Pacific Power has one called the Blue Sky Grant, and there are other grants like that that we can kind of point you in the right direction towards. And then the solar federal tax credit, I believe that it's very recent that there's been a change that allows nonprofits to sort of be able to benefit from that 30% tax credit, even if they're not paying taxes as a business might. So that's something that's been a really recent development, and that's something to look into a little bit more. But yeah, there are funding sources that are available for community solar projects for sure.
Okay, and so someone could reach out to you if they wanted more specifics, Allyse? Okay, fantastic, wonderful. Okay, so next question. If I do not have adequate rooftop solar access or the ground space, are there alternative options?
I think,
Shaun, yeah.
I guess it kind of dovetails with the other question about community solar. There are some community solar projects that have been growing. You kind of saw on my graph how it's like an emerging industry. So it's not like, I don't think you can go today and jump on, especially here in Southern Oregon. I know of one project that got launched, but it's not very widespread at the moment. But in the future, hopefully there'll be more community solar projects that give folks access to those, renewable energy credits and buying into it. I know the Blue Sky program has some offsets that you can buy, renewable energy certificates, but it's not the same as a local community solar project.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that, Shaun.
Okay, great. So assuming comparable roof space and ground space, what is the price comparison for those installations? That's a great question.
Yeah, I would say, the roof is just a lot more affordable. If you already have a roof with a great direction, that would be wonderful. Sometimes the roof is not facing in the right direction. But for example, roof is going to take us 1 day to install, so a lot less labor involved. Whereas the ground is going to take us about a week. Basically, we have to wait for that concrete to dry, do some trenching, a lot more work. The wires, so we've had 300-foot runs, and we need a little bit more robust wiring, a lot more equipment. So it depends on whether these are 20 panel systems, 60 panel systems. It really runs the gamut as far as cost. So I always hate these things that they don't tell you how much solar is going to cost you, like specifically, because every home and usage is a lot different. So I would say that roof mounts are more affordable than ground mounts.
Great. So Michael H. and anyone else in Klamath County, I just was able to pull up those two websites for Eco Solar and Pure Light Power. So those are now in the chat if you want to check those out. Okay, so next question from Terry. Can you put panels on an unpermitted building? Shaun, I'm guessing that's you.
It's a complex question. I know sometimes there's some that were grandfathered in, some structures, some barns that were grandfathered in, and because they were built before a certain year, they don't need a permit. But for the most part, we're going to need some type of most buildings we install on need some type of building permit. So a permitted structure is something that we usually look for, but we can get what we call an ag exemption sometimes for folks.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if anyone needs a follow-up, this is kind of a funny thing where they're answering and into the void, but if you have a follow-up, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we'll see. Also remember that both these folks are available to be contacted, and I'll put their emails again at the end just so you have them accessible, because I know the chat's pretty active, which is awesome. Okay, next question. What are the lifespans of batteries and panels? How often do they need to be replaced?
Let's see. I'm gonna look at the warranty. The panels is easy. It's a 25-year warranty. But I'm going to look at the Tesla Powerwall and see if it's 10. I believe it's 10 years for the battery, 25 years for the solar panels, 25 years for the inverters, and most of the other equipment has a warranty for 25 years. There's also something called warranty stacking. So for us, we have a 10-year workmanship warranty. There's also a performance warranty. So there's different warranties in place, but panels are 25, and then the batteries are about 10 years usually.
Great. Okay, next question. What does it cost to use Spark Northwest services?
Our services are free. We're a nonprofit and we're funded through USDA. Our technical assistance for REAP grants in particular are funded through USDA. So we are able to provide assistance free of cost.
That is good news. That's what we all wanted to hear. Okay, so next question. Can you address solar irrigation and any incentives for that?
I don't know that there's specific incentives for irrigation. It would be on a case by case basis. I know there's some folks that use a lot of water, and so those bills can get extremely high. And so I don't think there's any specific incentives. It would just have to depend on what that usage was for. If we could do a REAP grant for that, I think it would have to be tied to some agricultural business in that sense. So I think it would depend on the case.
Okay, so it sounds like that'd be a good follow-up for Shaun. Excuse me. Okay, next question. For agricultural irrigation, is solar competitive with grid tie, especially if you have no access to three-phase? It sounds like that.
Yeah, very similar to the previous question. I think it just depends on a case-to-case basis. So you can always invite folks out to kind of crunch the numbers and see what's possible. If we're, if there's no energy to the site and we're just dropping panels out in the field, I think that would be, we're talking about off-grid system there. I don't know if we need I think single phase would be just fine. I don't know if we can produce all the power. It just depends on how much you're actually using. So, it's because, yeah, the question is a little confusing. Is it competitive with grid tied? Solar is usually grid tied. So if you're talking off grid solar, I think that would be pretty expensive just because you would have to have a generator, batteries, and solar. So you just have a lot more components going into the system than just solar.
Okay. Great. Okay, next question. What's the more recent history of battery storage technology been like? How fast is the technology advancing? Wondering if storage capacities are improving. Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I started in the industry here at True South in 2016, and we weren't doing any battery storage. And now we have a warehouse and a backlog of a lot more folks adopting the storage technology. So I think it's advancing pretty fast. I don't know how fast they're improving, but I would think they're always innovating, and there's different options now, different battery options as well. So I think there is a lot of improvement in that sense. Solar, we saw rapid growth over the last 10, 15 years, but the efficiencies are slowing down a lot. I think battery technology will continue to improve.
Great. Thanks, Shaun. Okay, next question. Is there any funding or programs specific to agrovoltaics?
You want to tackle that one, Allyse?
I don't have anything particularly enlightening to say, only that it's a really interesting question, and one that I've been talking about amongst peers. And Jess, you should definitely email me so I have your contact and I can reach out to you with some information as I continue to look into it. But Shaun might have more information than I do about that one.
Well, I think it just kind of goes in with what Allyse talked about with the REAP grant, right? If it's agrivoltaics, the assumption would be that there would be some type of farm there that we're actually producing, some type of agriculture, and that we're, putting an array above that high enough so that we can still get under there with a tractor and do what we need to do as far as producing agriculture. So I think their USD REAP grant would be the biggest access to funding that I would see on the horizon.
There is the Planetary Care Grant Agency that's also funding agrivoltaics. And I will put their website into the chat. And it looks like the University of Arizona Arizona State University has been doing quite a bit of research on agrivoltaics. So that's on that webpage as well. And they've got some other good case studies and real world success stories. So that might be a good source of information. Okay, next question. Does Spark Northwest serve Oregon only through Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District, or do you have other partners?
So our rural renewables program specifically for Oregon is currently we're partnering with the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District. We've had other partners for this program in particular in the past. And then for our other programs, aside from our rural renewables program, we have other partnerships throughout Oregon. But for this partnership or this program in particular, Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District is our current partner for providing assistance.
And since we have a minute, we do have Jenna with the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District. So Jenna, do you want to, I'm just going to pin you real quick. And if you want to just say a quick hi so people have a face to the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District. There you are.
Yeah. Hi, folks. Yeah, my name's Jenna. I'm with the Shoot Soil and Water Conservation District. Yeah, if you happen to be located in my region, I'd love to chat with you about getting your small business or yeah, your rural small business or farm set up with solar. So
So
yeah,
Jenna, yeah, if you want to go ahead and put your email in the chat or the best way for folks to reach you, that would be awesome.
will do. I'll throw it in the
And
chat right now.
this
But
was
yeah,
spontaneous. Thanks for being willing, and I'll
yeah,
remove
of
the
course.
spotlight.
I appreciate it. No, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much to Elise and Shaun. That was a great presentation. And yeah, I
Great.
hope I can connect with some of y'all. Thanks.
Okay, cool. All right. So next question. How many days would an average full battery be able to power an average house if the power went out? Lots of averages in there, right? What is an average house?
Yeah, yep. Lots of assumptions always built into that. It just depends on what you're running. So let's just imagine it's an average house with an average battery and solar system, whatever that means. And I think it just depends on what you're running. So if we're in the heat of, or so say you have an all electric home and you're using it to try to heat your home, you're going to deplete that battery a lot faster. If you just have a battery with emergency loads, it's going to last a lot longer, say a refrigerator and a few lights for the bedroom, right? So I think each situation is going to be very specific, and each system is designed with those questions in mind. So we come out and do a consultation. We're asking you, do you want to back up your whole house? So we have whole house backup, where you see sometimes pictures of folks with 4 power walls, right? That is paying extra so that if the grid goes out, you can last a lot longer. So it really just depends. I don't think there is an answer. If the grid goes out in the summer and we're producing lots of solar, it can last a lot longer than if the grid goes out in the winter and we're not producing, not able to recharge that battery and you're running the house, pedal to the metal. So really just depends. But happy, it doesn't cost anything to get a consultation for folks. So if folks are ever interested in just learning what's possible for their home, it doesn't hurt our feelings to check it out. Even if you don't move forward, at least you'll know and have a benchmark for what it takes.
That's great to know that that's a free consultation. That's a great service. Cool. Okay, next question is directed to Allyse. Do you have any more info on the REAP grant if your farm/residents are on the same meter, or is it usually on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, so if your farm and your residents are sharing a meter, 50% or more of the electricity that you're using has to be from your business. So that's kind of the rule of thumb, but as usual, it's a bit of a case-by-case basis, and sometimes it's hard to know whether or not 50% of your electricity use is coming from your business or not. So that's kind of the rule of thumb, and then if your business, yeah, I would say just reach out and we can sort of determine whether or not you're eligible, but it's not the end of the world. You can still apply. It just might affect the amount of grant funding that you're awarded, or kind of some things like that, but yeah.
Great. Okay, and last question right now. So we do still have 15 minutes, so please keep the questions coming. Next question is it possible to add a battery to your solar system later on, or does it have to be installed initially?
Yeah, that's the good news with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the funding that invested in the USD REAP grant, is it allowed the tax credit to also be able. Well, first off, you can install a battery absolutely afterwards. It's the incentives that folks are usually curious about. So once you add a battery, you're now eligible for the 30% tax credit, and there are also some incentives from the state, from Energy Trust, for batteries as well, whether or not you coupled it with solar. That has been the thing. Usually there was only incentives when they're coupled together at the same time. And now that has changed. So that's a really good question, Joe.
Great. Well, that is all I'm seeing in the chat, unless I missed someone's, if I missed anybody, please speak up. You could raise your hand. We do have 13 more minutes with these folks. If people, if you'd rather, oh, good. Here we go. Thank you, Peter. Okay. Is it not possible to add a transfer switch for solar use during outage at all?
There are some inverters that will allow you to do that. I think SMA inverter has a little outlet. So it's not a lot. It was a couple outlets to plug in a cell phone just to charge that. But yeah, if the grid goes down, the overall rule is solar goes down right along with it, unless you have somewhere to store those electrons. So yeah, it's a good question. I think the assumption is I have a power plant. Why can't I use it? And it's really so that we don't electrocute anyone on the grid. So as long as you're not feeding back, that's the main thing. A lot of this is to code as well, so it's not something we choose. The equipment has to be very specific.
Great.
You can't. Yeah. So again, to code, you can't isolate the whole backup loads panels if you have the storage along with it. So no is the short answer. I think it's kind of the risk, it voids warranties and stuff like that.
I'm just going to add, because Peter has a follow-up question. You can't isolate with a transfer switch.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. You cannot just do a transfer switch on that solar system. And then basically the concern is that you might overload that grid. Say you isolate it and then it backfeeds too much. There's just some electrical code that we have to comply with. So that's not something I've seen in the market. If that was the case, we'd be doing that on a lot more systems. But it's not the case.
Great. So welcome, Marta. We are recording this, so you'll get a recording. So we'll answer your question at the end if we have time, but I'm glad you were able to make it for the end of the call. AJ asks, can a single house have multiple batteries? Is there a limit to how many batteries can be installed?
You are allowed to have multiple batteries. It just depends on what you're trying to back up. But yes, there are folks that have more than one batteries. And I'm not exactly sure what the maximum is for the Tesla Powerwalls. I believe it's either 6 or 10. Not a definite answer, but I know you can do more than one battery. But there's no use to have a whole bunch if you don't have that much load. So don't know if you'll need to hit that limit.
Okay, great. Lila asks, what is involved in technical support from Spark Northwest? So that's an Allyse question.
Yeah, we can provide grant writing assistance as kind of the main technical support that we provide, or if you're interested in other forms of grant funding, or you have questions about how incentives work, then we can support you in that as well. Just depends. But yeah, particularly with the REAP grant, we are able to work with you and your contractor to get all of the documents together and all of the information that we need for the grant. And then we're able to put it together and send it over you to send in to USDA. So we do the heavy lifting on that side of things, and we just get all the information that we need from you because it's a fairly technical grant. But that's for the REAP side of things, and then there are other ways we can assist, just depending on your situation.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, Leslie asks, are there any tax credits available for a used system that has been dismantled and could be put up elsewhere? It sounds like it's 15 years old.
To my understanding, it has to be a new system. Otherwise, folks would dismantle and reinstall multiple times if they could. So I believe it's just for new systems.
Okay. Great. Next question. What happens to batteries when they die in 10 years and you need replacements? A very good question, Carl. Or, sorry.
So once the warranty is up, I don't believe the batteries just stop working. So hopefully they last beyond that. But it is a great question. I think we're going to see the same thing with electric vehicles, right? A lot of electric vehicle batteries, what do we do with those batteries? So it's definitely a good question. Uncertain to how the industry will respond to that. Hopefully there will be some recycling in place and figuring out how we utilize those older technologies as we move forward. I know for solar, it's a lot more straightforward in that there's aluminum frames and glass and silicon, so it's easy to, recycle. But the batteries is something as a society we will have to tackle. That's a great question.
Yeah, really good question. Okay, next question is, are elevated dual access solar trackers worth the investment? So this sounds like a subjective question we want someone's opinion on.
I think it just depends. We've been seeing them more. There's a local manufacturer's tracker that does dual axis tracking. And they're saying they can produce 30% more on a smaller square footage. And so I think it's every situation dependent, right? So TC Chevy just did it. Evergreen Bank did it here in Ashland as well. There's a dentistry that did it because they didn't have the roof space, and they didn't want a carport. And so I think for some folks it is absolutely worth it, and if they can get the REAP grant for it as well, 50% of those costs are taken care of. So I believe for some situations it absolutely does make sense for folks.
Great.
And I believe there was a question that was missed
Oh no.
up at the top from Marta about what kind of projects have been accomplished so far.
Yeah, go ahead and answer that. That's great.
I believe there's a lot of different REAP grants that have been received. It kind of feels like they're under the radar. And as I was looking at who receives funding, Southern Oregon is not well represented on that list. So that was kind of the hope of bringing this presentation together, is to hopefully get the word out to more folks. So there are, I believe, Rusted Gate as a farm here in town that is doing a net zero project. And they have some solar trackers, and as well as some rooftop installation as well. But their goal was to get to net zero. And so that is a project we're currently working on. Terra Mine, White City. So another, what you would think of as a bigger business, but it still qualifies as a small business, is looking into the REAP grant as well. There's some small farms that have got some, I believe Whistling Duck.
Whistling Duck, yeah. And we
Whistling
got
Duck just
my
received
farm,
one.
Wolf Gulch, got one. Did you said 10, I think it was 10 or 15 years ago. It's been a long time.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of folks that are, what's nice is there's that federal funding is already there sitting. And so the more we can bring it to the Valley and raise awareness about it, the better. I think the grant is very daunting. So to the question about, what does Spark Northwest, how do they help out? It's a lot of peace of mind. If you look at that grant, the government grant, it is daunting. And so they're able to tell you, okay, here's your Nexus code, right? Here's, how many employees you can have, or what your the maximum of your income can be. They have a team of folks that look at that all the time. And so I think they just kind of dispel all the myths that are out there, or the gobbledygook, and make some order out of chaos. So just my little 2 cents on why I reached out to Spark Northwest in the first place, because we don't have the capacity to help write those grants. And so reaching out to folks that, that's their expertise is super helpful.
Fantastic. Okay, AJ asks a question here. I know it's vague, but could a single Tesla battery power a typical 2 or 3 bedroom house for a few days, a few weeks? Just wondering what a ballpark estimate would be.
Yeah, again, it's if say we do a single power wall and you just have the emergency load sub panel. So there's 2 types of backup systems. One would be the whole house, your air conditioning, everything is taken care of, right? The well, all these things are taken care of. Or you can just have a critical load sub panel where it's just a few loads. I would think the few loads can last a few weeks. Whereas if you're doing a whole house backup, might be a few days if we're talking in these averages, right? Again, it's all seasonal, right? So we're looking at a big bell curve. In the summer, there's a lot more production. And so if you have an outage in the summer, you're a lot better off. If you have an outage in the winter, it's going to be a lot less time. So I don't think it's as straightforward, but luckily you will have an app to help manage your production in that scenario. And I don't have batteries on my solar system. So once you go solar and with batteries, you're going to learn a lot faster than most folks. It's really, ahead of the curve for what we're seeing here in the Valley. A very small amount of folks have their actual solar backed up to storage.
Cool. Okay. And then Marta asks, if the location is in the county, but the address is Medford, is Medford greater than 50,000 population? Isn't that a measurement of eligibility?
Yeah, so with the eligibility for being in a rural area, it really just it depends on kind of USDA's map in particular, and I'm actually going to throw it in the chat here so that folks have access to it. But you can go to this this website, and there are two links there. You'll use the first link to get to that map. You'll put your address in there, and it'll tell you whether or not you're in an eligible area, because it can be kind of tricky to tell sometimes.
Yeah, I've seen folks still in Medford address, but because they're outside of Medford city limits, they still qualify for that grant. But yeah, this link is super helpful just to get that answer right away.